So I would like to welcome you all to our latest Precursive webinar, Fixing the Capacity Crunch in this New World of High Velocity Services Delivery. That's a very catchy title. I know that's what you're all thinking. Today we'll be exploring the evolution of services delivery and some of the things that have disrupted this traditional model of services and customer success. We'll be looking at why managing your people, their capacity and productivity is a critical organisational capability, and our guests are here to share some of their own approaches. Today, we are very lucky to be joined by three guest speakers. Kimberly Simms, who is the Chief Customer Officer at Planful, who will be talking us through how your people really drive your customer experience. Phil Davitt, Director of Global PMO at Condeco, who will be focusing on the future of services, And last but not least, Peter Lyon, who is VP of Global Customer Success at Poppulo, who will be looking at the merge between customer success and professional services and the new wave of onboarding at Poppulo. So before we hear a brief introduction from our speakers, I'll just give you a quick introduction to myself. So I'm Zoe. I am our Product Marketing Manager here at Precursive. Prior to this, I was the head of onboarding and product operations at a company called IncoPro. IncoPro is a UK-founded SaaS company, and we provided managed services to global brand protection teams. During my time at IncoPro, I really saw the shift in customer expectations, especially in relation to onboarding. In the age of convenience, our customers wanted increasingly fast time to value, and our managed service team stayed largely the same size. Customers wanted to get their hands on our product and the value it brings quicker than they ever did before. So just a bit of housekeeping before I hand over to our speakers to introduce ourselves. I want to mention that we do have a Q&A function throughout this webinar. So please, if you have questions, ask them throughout. But I would ask that you put them to the group rather than to individuals, so our admins behind the scenes can get to them. We will try to answer as many of your questions during, but there also is a dedicated Q&A at the end where we'll put your questions to our speakers. Also, I'm sure many of you have seen that the most insightful question will be in with a chance to win a $100 Amazon gift voucher. So to ask a question, simply click the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. So without further ado, next quickly hear from our speakers, starting with Kimberly. Thank you so much for joining us. Would you just give everybody a brief introduction to yourself, please?
Yeah, happy to. Hi, everybody, and thanks so much, Zoe. As Zoe mentioned, my name is Kimberly Simms. I am our Chief Customer Officer at Planful. Those of you that are new to Planful is a SaaS solution that is leveraged with finance teams to help on both the two sides of the business, if you will, the FP&A, the planning and budgeting and forecasting side, as well as the accounting side, which is more of the close and consolidations processes. I'm based here in Denver, Colorado. In the United States. And as mentioned, I'm responsible for, I'm our CCO and I'm responsible for professional services, customer success, training, and support. So nice to be here.
Great, thank you so much, Kimberly. Phil, hello, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, hi Zoe, hi everybody. So my name is Phil Davitt and I'm Director of Global PMO here at Condeco. We provide solutions which enable people to safely get into an office. Previously it would have been kind of using rooms and kind of becoming efficient with your room space, but that's expanded out to also desk spaces and really any space, parking spaces, locker spaces, anything like that. So as I'm sure you can imagine, that's quite popular right now because we're enabling people to safely get their teams back into offices. And so, you know, the capacity piece for us has been huge over the past year, where we're seeing what I guess a lot of SaaS companies are seeing, which is an increase in demand. People want the tool, they want it as quickly as possible. They want to gain those benefits as quickly as possible. And yeah, we've just come out of the capacity planning for next year and the year after, where we put a lot of time and attention into figuring out how can we use our resources as efficiently as possible to kind of deliver value and that kind of outcome-based value as soon as possible.
Great, thank you, Phil. Yeah, that's very topical. We look forward to hearing more about that in your section a bit later on. And finally, Peter, welcome.
Hi, everyone. Yes, Peter Lyon, brief update. So Global VP of CS for FWI Poppulo now, as of a few weeks ago. FWI is one of the world's largest digital signage companies, SaaS business. Poppulo is one of the world's leading email internal communicators and also mobile. So FWI and Poppulo have combined to create a unified communication experience platform. So we're about 600 people now and in excess of 100 million of ARR, and we were recently brought together by Vista Private Equity. So I have a team of around 100 people now as of last week. So I'm really looking forward to hearing Phil and Kimberly's expertise to help me. I'll be taking furious notes.
Lovely, thank you, all three of you. Thank you so much for joining us. So before we get started, I'm sure that everybody on the webinar is just thinking, well, what actually is high velocity services delivery? So on the slide at the moment, you can see how we at Precursive define this, and I won't sit here and read out directly from the slide. I'll take a pause. I'll allow everybody on the call to read the definition, but as you're reading, there should hopefully be a poll that comes up on your screen which asks you if you are currently working in a high velocity services delivery model or not. So I'll pause here, I'll let you read the screen and give you a few seconds to answer the poll. Great, okay, I am assuming I read it in that time, so I hope everybody else read it in that time. As soon as we get the results from the poll, I will let you know how kind of that fared out, but really what we're expecting to see, which I'm hoping as I'm sharing it, you can all see that really 86% of everybody on the call is saying, yes, we do work in a high velocity services delivery model, which is what we were hopefully expecting, because what we're really seeing, and what I think that probably means a lot of people on this call are seeing, is that we're working in really an age where we have lots of different fast moving projects. Things are happening quickly, we're having more tasks coming our way, we need to get on top of our capacity. And going back to my time at IncoPro, that was really what I started to see the longer I worked there. So when I first joined, when the company was the startup and I led their onboarding, we would do a handful of onboarding projects each month. The deployment would typically last 3 months, and our customers were really happy with that. But the longer I worked there, the more we grew. We were doing upwards of maybe 10 projects a month, and we would deploy within a month. And even then our customers were saying, oh, that seems a bit long, you know, what results can we get within the first 2 weeks? And that's what here at Precursive we call the capacity paradox, which you can now see on screen. And it's because of that that, you know, people really use capacity as a key metric. People need a way to be able to better manage and allow for better understanding of the capacity. So in our white paper study, which I'll talk more about later, we surveyed professionals and only 95% of our professionals said that capacity is a strategic metric, which is great. However, only 11% of the people that answered that questions rated themselves good at measuring their own capacity, which we thought was quite interesting because obviously everybody knows that's a really important metric, but it's not clear the best way to measure it. And the graph on screen shows you just how we got to that conclusion, basically, that people knew it was important, but on average, only 11% said, I'm really confident in measuring this metric. And I'll come back to our study at the end of this presentation. So I'm sure you've had enough of me talking now, and you all came here to listen to our speakers. So without further ado, I will hand over to Kimberly, who I'm sure will be able to give a bit more in depth on her background, but also if any of those metrics that we currently just mentioned line up with what you found at the moment. Kimberly, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks again, Zoe. Yeah, just to tell you a little bit more about who I am. I've been doing customer-facing roles my entire career, over 20 years now. Started at a little company you may have heard of called Anderson Consulting, which now goes by Accenture. That's where I first got exposed to consulting and technology, and I absolutely loved it. Joined my first startup in early 2000 that got quickly acquired by IBM, where I actually spent over half of my career, believe it or not, in every kind of professional services role that you can imagine. The major difference at IBM versus where we are today is that was mostly on-prem. So the world at IBM, I was dealing with software on-prem solutions, professional services, how you do, our waterfall methodologies, if you will, all of the sales, PMO, offerings, all of that good stuff. I had all of that responsibility at IBM, which was great. But then I decided it was time I needed to jump into the world of SaaS. And I earned my quick SaaS stripe by jumping over to a company called Anaplan, which you may have heard of, also a finance tool very similar to Planful. And I earned my SaaS stripe there in a very hyper growth company. I think, again, I always joke about my hair was on fire then, and it's still cooling down from that ride. I took a pivot and went into HR tech and joined a company called HireVue. And that's where I earned my AI stripe. So I wanted to learn a little bit more about artificial intelligence. And that was a hiring technology leveraging that capability. And then I was very fortunate about a year ago to come back to Planful and work with some of the folks I had worked with at Anaplan previously. And I'm on a great ride now here as well. Just, a little bit about me personally. I have a passion in the work perspective of developing great, incredible teams that are passionate about customer success, just as I am. But on the home front, I'm an Uber driver part-time for my 3 children who are in every activity that you can imagine. And I spend a lot of time outdoors. Obviously, I'm in Colorado, so we can hike, bike, and ski all year round. So it's a great place to be. So that's just a little bit about me. If we want to jump over to the slide. So experience is where I wanted to start with. I talked a little bit about that in my introduction. I'm incredibly passionate about having incredible experiences with our customers and everything that we do all throughout the journey. But I think when we talk about experience, I think it's important to not just think about the customer, but also the teams that we're working with. Many of you are leaders of teams, I'm sure, on the phone, and the experience of your teams is just as important to ensure you have an incredible experience with your customers. So to start with, expectation management is something that I've found incredibly important in my career, and developing a really tight relationship with your sales organization. How do you make sure that sales understands the capacity and availability of your professional services team? And are they in a position to deliver upon signature? Probably not. Is the customer going to be ready to deliver upon signature? Probably not. So it's really good to be aligned with your sales organizations to set the right expectations with customers on the willingness to start projects. When we're dealing with capacity crunches, just throwing more into your professional services team to take on more work right when they sign doesn't do anybody good. It's not good for the customer or your professional services team. So super important to have a good expectation management in place, and also the role that your customer needs to play on the project. The second thing is, when we talk about the experience of your teams, I find it's really important to bring your professional services team along on the journey. Help them understand their role in the organization. Give them some insight into the financial metrics. You never want them to feel like they're on this revenue treadmill, because then if they feel that way, they're going to start to become resentful. And it's really important that they know their role in impacting the company's success, not just from a customer success delivery perspective, but why utilization matters to them, why we look at their capacity, how those numbers tie out to a revenue target, why is margin important, all of those good things. It's really important to bring your team along on the journey. And if you find that they are feeling stretched thin, bring them into the loop, have a team meeting with them and talk to them about, okay, I know everyone's overwhelmed. Let's brainstorm together on solutions that we can look at to tackle feeling overwhelmed. When you do that, you may get some great ideas, but it also helps them recognize that you understand that they're feeling a little stretched thin, and that goes a long, long way. And then on the third thing, just doing the math, understanding the capacity of what they truly can do. It's funny. I think if you aren't aware of how many projects they can support, how many hours are in a day, how many hours they truly are spending on customers, you could quickly fall into the trap of shoving too much on their plates, and then they're going to become overwhelmed. So it's important to understand what truly can they take on, And also do what's the obvious, is remove the blockers, help them take out the obstacles, take out the unnecessary meetings, help them be successful with the heavy workload that they'll all have. So when I think about experience from a professional services and a customer perspective, I think about these topics that rises right to the surface for me. But if you flip to the next side, just in general, if you find you're in this capacity crunch and you've got more work coming in and you don't know how to tackle it all, these are some things that I always think about when it comes to finding that additional capacity. Partner ecosystems and external contract help. So if you do the math, again, my team knows I'm all about, it's just a math equation. But if you do the math and you think about next year, for example, how many customers are you going to take on? How many projects are you going to take on? Are you going to be able to get more headcount? If not, how are you going to do all that work? It's good to think outside of the box. Think about, can you leverage partners? Can you bring in some contract help? My team was really creative and they thought about contracting out some project management work actually. And that is saving the team a ton, and it's billable, and you get great margins when you go outside as well. So that was a really creative idea that my team had that I really supported. Hiring strategies as well. Should you get that headcount, which is fantastic in the new year, think about your strategy. Do you need to bring in those most senior resources? Or could you bring in 2 junior resources, for example, and create a succession plan, but also maybe a career opportunity for someone on your existing team? When you think about folks that leave, sometimes it's because they don't see career progression. So by bringing in an opportunity for them to lead maybe some more junior resources, you're kind of killing a bunch of birds with one stone there by bringing in more people onto your team, but also creating career opportunity for those that are there. So just be creative with your hiring strategies. When you think about your flying formation of your team on a client site, really challenge yourself. Does every person need to be in each one of those meetings? Do you have a really clear role of responsibilities of who's who in the zoo and, who's going to play what role in what meeting? The other thing to do is to challenge yourself too. Can customers actually play a larger role in the deployment? That's just tremendous in itself because they learn to use the software better. So it's actually a great thing in change management too. It gives you capacity, but it helps them learn the tool and they're going to adopt it better as well. So that's a really good strategy to think about too. And lastly, this billable rates concept too. Just check your billable rates, make sure you're competitive, but if you increase them a little bit, got a little bit more margin, could you work with your finance team and get another headcount out of it? So think about those types of things as well. Just being creative around billable rates is another suggestion. Zoe, did you want to talk about this one?
Yes, we were both on it then, Kimberly. We knew it was going to come up. Yes, so as on the screen at the moment, what you can see is a graph that's taken from our white paper that's coming out at the end of November. And here we asked, we surveyed our participants and we wanted to know exactly how they measured their capacity or what was most important. So from this study, you can see that actually billable utilization dropped in popularity. People were asked to choose more than one method of measuring their capacity. So you might see that actually the total percentages add up to more than 100. But I think that makes it even more interesting that that particular metric maybe isn't as popular as we think it is or think it once was. I don't know, Kimberly, does that line up to kind of how you measure your own capacity within your organization?
Yeah, it's interesting because when I looked at this data, I'm like, gosh, we use a little bit of everything all over the place. And honestly, it depends on what problem I'm trying to solve by looking at the data. So I look at capacity, I should say my leaders built an incredible capacity model to support us in our planning processes for next year. So capacity is a good way to figure out how much work you can take on and do you have a gap. Whereas we use utilization, and we actually are probably more on the productive utilization side, a combination of billable and customer facing on the bonus schemes for our people to get them motivated and have them have a target to shoot for bonuses. So we do capacity for planning, utilization for bonuses. That's what we do at Planful. Hopefully that's helpful. The last nugget before I'm done with my time is, I've talked a lot about professional services strategies and the experience of the customer and that team is switching over to customer success. As I mentioned, I have responsibility for this neck of the woods at Planful as well. And again, you'll see my statement, do the math. If my team was on today, and they're probably chuckling because I always talk about it being a math equation, as I said. But for this one, in particular for customer success, I think it's important to understand the metrics of your business at the big picture level. You know, what does your board care about? What does your CEO care about? Are they looking for growth? Are they looking to improve retention? Probably they're looking to improve both, but it's really important to understand the KPIs of the business, because you're going to build a segmentation model that's going to support that trajectory. And if you don't have a good relationship with your finance team, strongly encourage you to have that relationship so they can help you understand the key metrics of the business to make sure you're pulling the right levers that you can help to influence those metrics. But once you understand those metrics, then it comes down to really intelligent segmentation. In a perfect world, we could treat all customers equally, but we know that will never happen. So you have to be smart about how you service your customers. Bubble up and prioritize the ones that you need to focus on. Maybe that's bigger ARR. Maybe there's higher potential for growth. Maybe they're higher risk for churn. But you've got to come up with an intelligent segmentation model so you know where to focus your time, which will have the most impact. We did something really unique at Planful. We're almost done with it, actually. We leveraged our data scientists to go back and look at historical churn data. And we're using that historical churn data to develop a propensity to churn model. So we can incorporate that into our segmentation. So we can flag customers that show those signals, those early churn warning signals, into our segmentation model. So if you've got that skill set, I highly encourage you to leverage it because it's been incredibly insightful. And then the last bit is just creative servicing, just figuring out how to do more with less. You know, again, we all want to talk to every customer, but it's literally impossible, you know, for most organizations. So find ways to engage with them through automated email programs. Something that I did at my last company, I had each of the CSMs record themselves with every new product release, walk through what the release was, and use that as a way to send out to each of their customers to tell them what was new in the release and what they'd be excited about. We had an automated renewals program, for example. Find automation so you can prioritize the really meaningful engagement, person-to-person context, if you will. So those are just some suggestions on the customer success side. If you find yourself capacity crunch there as well, these are some things that I've done in my past. Hopefully that's helpful.
Now, thank you so much, Kimberly. It was really interesting to hear about the historical churn as well, and how you linked in with your data scientists. Hopefully we can delve a bit deeper into that in the Q&A later. But now I'll hand over to Phil, who will be looking at the future of services. So Phil, over to you.
Thanks, Kimberly. I took loads of notes there, and I loved the term flying formation of your teams, and I've noted that down. I'm like, yeah, absolutely. That's something that I think we've thought about here and kind of said, you know, we want to consider this, but I love the fact we can package it up with a name like that. That's great. So as way of a bit more introduction, so my background pre-SaaS, which I guess I joined into a SaaS company about 8-9 years ago. For the 10 years before that, I worked in customer service, customer success, so customer service and kind of contact centers, and a lot of the stuff that I do now, the foundations of it comes from the work there. So I spent a number of years working within scheduling, forecasting, and planning. In fact, I had a role of capacity planner at one point. And one of the first things that we kind of were taught in those roles is that when you're planning headcount and how you're going to use it, it's 50% art and 50% science. So kind of going back to what Kimberly was saying, do the math, that's your science. You need a good solid model that can look at inputs, lots of different various inputs, and tell you what those outputs are going to be. But then you need that art piece, the kind of the crystal ball to forecast, well, what might change to those inputs, and if this changes, what impact does that have? So, you know, if we can drive up the rate that we're selling for, what impact does that have to our margin? What does that mean that we can do to hire? But then the art piece is, well, how would we drive up the sales rates? And one of the last things I was involved with in a customer service area was a large project where they were looking at completely replacing the contact center technology. And the company that came in to kind of pitch for that business was suggesting a 1.5-year deployment. They were saying, you know, you're going to buy all of this stuff up front. We're going to take 1.5 years, hundreds of thousands of pounds, hundreds of thousands of dollars to install all this technology. And then by the time we're done, we're out, we're going to leave you to it. And that's kind of the big thing that I've seen that's changed, right? Is that is no longer acceptable for businesses. And that's part of what I want to talk about today. And whilst the term, I had planned to say traditional services is dead is maybe a slight exaggeration, but with 86% of people on the call saying, no, we're using high velocity, then it probably sounds like it's definitely in the death throes, if nothing else. And that's because people don't want those large 1.5-year projects to 4 months worth of planning, 2 years delivery, 5 years BAU just to get a service into place. What people are looking for is an MVP delivered now that we can iterate on and improve on. It's that difference between what is waterfall and agile. I want something now, and I want to kind of keep developing it and delivering it little by little. And it's the difference between having a project manager that is used to working on one project over the course of a year with a large team of analysts and junior PMs, etc. What we're probably seeing now is people working on 15, maybe plus projects. So the install base that we want, customers will install the product, they will still leave it, but that's not what they want to do. What they want to do is keep iterating again and again and again. And some of the impacts that we are seeing here is that customers are becoming far more important in this delivery. Kimberly again mentioned it in hers. What can the customer do as part of the delivery? What can they be part of? Because also, if you've got a delivery planned over a month and the customer is a week late for doing their particular piece, that's going to throw out all your planning and all your modeling. And when you're doing that over 20 to 30 customers at a time, that can make such a big impact. And one of the things that I've done in the past, in a previous role, in a previous life, was find a way to kind of take the work that we were doing and the customer drive to have these little micro iterations and actually turn that on its head and say, okay, rather than just do an onboarding and trying to find a way to keep engaged, actually let's offer that out as a service. So we did that as a managed service. Also it's known as services as a service, where the customer can buy a contract for what is effectively a micro amount compared to what you might get for onboarding. You might, instead of getting 15 days work, you might only need half a day per month or a day per month. And that time then comes from the onboarding team to help you kind of keep improving and pushing it forward so that your product isn't kind of stagnant and staying where it is for the course of 2 years, 3-year contracts. A number of customers that I spoke to kind of say, great, I bought this 3 years ago. I'm coming up for my renewal. And I'm looking at it saying, well, it's doing the same thing it was 3 years ago. And there are other companies out there saying, look at all this great stuff that we can do. And you go back to them and say, yeah, we've improved over the last 3 years as well. It's just you haven't deployed these features that are available to you. So by having that service as a service, you can keep going back to that customer on a regular basis and make sure they're using the most up-to-date features, make sure they're getting the most out of what they've already bought. But there are some things that you do need to consider. It's not necessarily right for everybody, because how you frame the contracts are quite important. As it says there, how do you best structure that to make sure you're going to be profitable, but that you're doing the right thing for the customer. It's very easy if you turn around and say, I'm going to move this revenue from one time to recurring. People can get very, very excited, right? Suddenly I'm going to have some more license revenue. It's maybe not as high margin as your license revenue would be for user licenses, because for every 10 days I sell, I'm going to need to hire another head to kind of deliver that. But on top of that, it's very, very quick services. I need to be able to pick up the phone and speak to somebody that day. And whereas if on my onboarding journey, I might have a week's wait. So suddenly you find kind of the sales team might be selling the services as I'll sell this managed service for you rather than onboarding, and you can start your project tomorrow. Probably the biggest benefits I see, we've got the team side, which is that you become more predictable, right? You know that you've got 5 days per month or 6 days per month, and as you sell it, you kind of know that you're increasing. So you've got a far more repeatable model that you can provide to the finance team and say, well, we've already sold this. I've sold it now for the next 3 years, so I need to increase my team size. And going back to what Kimberly was saying, maybe hiring some junior resources because some of this work is repeatable. They can start there and then they can kind of progress out, and you've suddenly got a talent pool to kind of grow into your consultancy arm. You've got another service, another layer that the customer success team can rely on. So your customer success team aren't talking about deploying the product for your customer. They're there again, just providing the success and saying, did you know if you use this feature that's available to you, you might be able to get more outcomes? Why don't you kind of get it delivered by the team that you've already got ready to do that? And from the customer side, they're speaking to you far more regularly, rather than I bought it 3 years later, I've come back to you and I don't feel like you've done anything for me over the past year, 2 years, 3 years. Actually, you've got month-on-month improvements. The product owner on the customer side, whoever it is that's bought it, is able to come back and say, yeah, I bought it 3 years ago, but look at everything we've done with it since. And that helps cement that relationship. And obviously from our side also helps secure the renewal. I'm going to take a breath and I'll let the page move on.
No, thank you, Phil. That was really interesting. And I think what really resonated with me is that, you know, customers more and more need to be involved in the onboarding process. And I think when I first started at onboarding, we really wanted to make it as easy as possible by doing as much as we can, which we still did. But actually, engaging our customers more and kind of splitting the tasks, it drove adoption of our product much easier, and we actually got to the end goal much faster.
Careful not to go too far in that direction, because you could start building up, great, here's all the stuff that you as a customer can do. You know, there is a line that you cross where you say, well, I'm buying this as a product and I'm paying for you to give me this outcome. It's outcome based. I want to get to this outcome and I kind of want you to facilitate that.
Completely agree. No, it's definitely a fine line. And I think, I think it'd be good to kind of explore that a bit more in our Q&A later on. So last but by no means least, Peter, I hand over to you to talk about what happens when these two worlds collide.
Yeah, what a topic. Well, when they collide, and when they collide, boy, do they collide. I was just listening to what Phil and Kimberly are saying, that apart from making notes, you know, I was thinking it was throwing me back to about 9.5 years ago. I was sitting in front of the head of procurement, who was also the head of IT. He had a dual large utility company in the UK. And I was quoting him 1.1 million to replace his 35,000 lines of customized code with 35,000 lines of other customized code. And he asked me, what business benefit am I going to get from this? And I said, absolutely none. But it will work on Windows NT as opposed to 98. And I remember going back to to my head of PS, because I was running a very, very large PS team at the time, and I was the director of professional services there. And my head of PS was very disappointed because it just removed, clearly the customer said no, by the way, that the head of PS was very disappointed because his utilization was going to be screwed up. The head of sales was absolutely livid with me because I turned around to the customer and said, fair enough, let's just use COTS software. Let's just use off-the-shelf stuff and reimagine your processes. So the head of sales was very annoyed with me because it took 1.1 million off its pipeline. And that's when I realized that this is all wrong, because we can't be relying on upgrades for our revenue because we're not providing value. And this is not the way the world is actually going. So that's my sort of, I guess, little story into the next bit, which is that, you know, I do come from that old world of professional services. I also come from a sales background, and I ran multiple P&Ls. But what I would say is that there's an awful lot of great stuff in the old world, if we like. And there's also these narratives that talk about, oh, VCs don't like services revenue, they only like product revenue. And that's absolutely true. But I do feel that we just need to be careful that we don't dismiss the benefits and the practice and the discipline that the old world actually gives us, right? So So I think, you know, what we are looking at is how in CS we learned how to leverage the concept of services and how we utilize those services in a way that on the success of the customer, as opposed to utilization, margin, and bookings, right? Revenue bookings. Whilst they are important, right? We have to keep our eye on the prize. And I talk a little bit about some of the changes we're trying to bring into Poppulo and also into FWI Poppulo, because FWI still has a very large on-prem business. And over time, over the next few years, we're going to hopefully move a lot of those customers from on-prem over to a cloud-based solution. So I will be eating my own lunch, as they say, over the next while. You know, we talk about targets and incentives earlier. So, you know, there's no point in talking to a services team that's either inside a CS team or working alongside a CS team to focus on customer outcomes unless you're going to reward them for customer outcomes. So changing those KPIs. One of the things that we focused on hugely was margin. Now, as I'll talk about later on, the mission statement for our services team was to drive adoption whilst not losing money. So why is margin important? Well, if you don't know your margin, then you don't know if you're losing money or not. But if you know your margin, then you're probably being very disciplined about what you're quoting, what your estimates are, and so on. So this is where the old school discipline of getting all that right. But it doesn't mean you measure your team on margin. I don't measure the team on margin. I measure them on retention, right? But we use margin as a secondary one. A shared mission, absolutely. If your professional services team is outside of your CS team, there are challenges in trying to orientate two different teams with different bosses around a common set of goals and of objectives. But I think what you can do is that maybe what you do is over time you build your high velocity services team in your CS team. This is if you have your professional services world and you have your CS world, and maybe over time just gradually move it in, right? Just move it in, get those right skills in, and prove to people that this is all a good positive thing. It just does get banded quite a lot that, you know, the journey starts with the onboarding. Well, of course it does. It hardly starts with the renewal, right? But I think it's just so important that if you subscribe to the concept that TTV, time to value, is the true metric when it comes to onboarding customer, and the customer first experience of you is the one that's going to last the most, right? Which typically it is. Then you've got to have the right capacity to be able to deliver multiple customers and onboard multiple customers at the same time, right? So understanding your resource management, again, the old school rules, you've got to have, just because you have high velocity services doesn't mean that you don't use proper resource management tools to actually manage them. You've got to schedule them in. You've got to be able to make sure that you've got the right people skills and everything else, and that's all incorporated into your overall TTV strategy. The gift of time, never has it been so important. So I think Phil mentioned it earlier on. You know, the role of the project manager is absolutely critical here, right? And not just managing your own capacity, but the capacity of the customer. Because don't forget, a lot of the time when you're providing a service, you're probably filling a gap that the customer has. Because if they had that capacity, they'd probably be able to do it themselves. And then taking responsibilities, and that's again, making sure that everyone understands their part and their role in getting that customer's value point. And that's hugely important. And then to obviously if you're going to give somebody responsibility, then obviously recognize their responsibility when they do come through. So just to talk a little bit about process, people and technology. When I started at Poppulo, we had a very, very high retention rate. And I remember saying to the CEO at the time, well, what's the problem? And the problem was how we onboard customers, the time that it was taking to actually get customers to that point of value. So what we did was we deconstructed the entire journey. So we looked at the entire journey from sales handover all the way over to going live, if you like. And then we baselined a whole load of data points. And then we examined again that customer journey from the pre-sales to the close one. We established that team, the onboarding team mission. And I think that was really important because that's their North Star. That's where they go whenever they get a little bit lost, right? And again, whilst not losing money is that critical end sentence. And then to ensure we had that disciplined project management. So you talk about headcount. I was fortunate enough to be able to make the case to recruit 5 people over the course of a year. And so to bring in dedicated project managers to take the task of onboarding away from CSMs. Because Poppulo had just grown up, and this happens in an awful lot of companies where things just happen because that's the way they used to happen, and that's the way things are. So I was able to come in and maybe break that mold. But we transition the customer as opposed to hand over. So that's an important distinction. So wording is also important. So again, as we went through this whole re-engineering of the onboarding process, and then the final thing we did was we decided to go into 2 different work streams. What we were finding was we were doing a kickoff meeting and everyone was talking about business outcomes and D&Zs and whitelisting in the same meeting, and half the people were getting bored and the other half didn't understand what was going on. So what we said, okay, let's just split this up into 2, and that might actually help us get there quicker. So rather controversially, we then moved to timesheets. Now, this was a company that did not use timesheets. So we called it effort management. We have to call it something. So effort management, but we explained to people why. And that's also important. Why are you asking me to do this? Why? Because I never used to do this, especially some of the CSMs. But we were able then to show them. And over time, what we did was we actually reduced within 6 months the total onboarding time by 35%. Now that's nearly in our days, that's almost a month. So we were getting customers onboarded a month earlier than we were 6 months earlier. We were also able to reduce some of those phases by up to 75%. So the reason why I waved there is because the CEO just waved at me, so I had to wave back. Sorry, I couldn't ignore him. And then we also looked at extending the reporting capability of within Salesforce, because that's important as well. And then obviously by going back to team as well and saying, look, introducing an onboarding RAG, not to be confused with the customer RAG, escalation process back into engineering for blockers and estimates and actual. So technology plays a huge part. So in summary, it was a blend of discipline from the traditional services side, and then you can see the slide here. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but you can see how you can actually move over from left to right. And I'm going to stop talking there as well.
No, thank you, Peter. Yeah, this slide you can see at the moment is actually taken from our white paper that I keep mentioning. And basically, we thought it really shows kind of the differences between that traditional services delivery to what we're talking about today and the high velocity services delivery model. But we shall revisit that towards the end of the webinar. But thank you very much. I think we will now move into our Q&A. So we'll get started with, I think first of all, we'll go to a question from Ryan. This one has been asked directly to Phil, but please, Kimberly and Peter, feel free to also answer. So Ryan says, Phil talked about managed services, and this sounds somewhat like technical account management. Do you have a technical account management team or function that engages with your customers post-implementation to continue to drive that value? And if so, does this team help retain customers and reduce your churn?
I guess if I step in first then. As a starting point, I would say that maybe I was describing it poorly, but yeah, I would see this not like technical account management at all, more like a support and a service desk where, you know, a customer is able to request things through the means of caseload. I'm going to phone up and ask, can you please do this for me? And someone will be available to do it. Someone can proactively reach out and say, hey, I'd like you to install this piece of tech. I want you to use this feature, and they can kind of do that. But it's more on an interaction basis rather than having, you know, an individual who is assigned to the account. That's one of the ways that you can scale that team, is by having multiple people that all deal with the same customers. Answering the actual question, which is, do you have a TAM team? It's actually something that we're building right now, and the intention is exactly as Ryan's put on there. You know, engage with customers post the implementation to continue to drive value and business outcomes. It's not kind of crossing over with the CSM. The CSM still has their role, which is to drive kind of adoption and outcomes for the customer, to manage that. But the technical account manager is there from as it sounds, from a technical basis. So yeah, they are there to help retain customers and reduce churn by finding those things that might be blocking the customer from getting the value out of the product. And it's not to say we don't do that today. It's just there's nobody whose exact role that is, which means it then gets picked up across other areas of the team. CSM reaches out and says, this customer's having this technical problem. I need somebody to come and help me. And suddenly all your capacity plans are thrown out because, well, that team is supposed to be over here, then over here, then over here. But you know what? We know that we need to do this for our existing customer as well.
Yeah, on the Planful side of the house, we have professional services team, and they are focused purely on onboarding, delivery of our solution. And then we have a customer success side, which we call them CSMs, customer success managers. And their pure absolute responsibility is to drive adoption of the product and reduce churn, to your point. And it's an interesting, I think it was Phil who mentioned the complementary between the two types of teams, and Peter did, I think, as well. And I think that's exactly right. I mean, if you think about the professional services team and how they're measured, it's by margin, and you have to make sure you're always keeping that in mind in terms of billable utilization and all of that. Whereas you think about customer success teams, they're measured based on retention typically. And so the roles are slightly different. It's more of an investment in the organization, and the return is your ROI is around retention outcomes. So gross retention is such a huge metric for SaaS companies specifically, obviously. So long story short, yes, we have both. We actually added flavor to this. We have a triangle, if you will: professional services for delivery, CSM for post-delivery, adoption support, maximizing value realization. We also have a role called an SSM, which is a strategic sales manager. They're focused on upselling and growing an account. So you can imagine the importance of having all of these different relationships to trust each other and know the roles and not confuse the customer either. So the SSM there is to help land and expand an account. So if a CSM identifies in our world an opportunity to grow, they bring in the SSM to do the selling. That way the customer knows the CSM is there for their success. They're not being compensated on an upsell. We have a true person that's responsible for doing the selling in our organization, and that model works really well for us.
The only thing I would add is I think just to pick up on one point is that as long as there's clarity with the customer as to what the role of the TAM is versus what the role of the CSM, my own personal experience is that if you have multiple roles, that you just need to be very, very mindful of all these acronyms that are flying around, and most customers probably won't really care about your struggles to define the roles and responsibilities. They just want to get the problem fixed. And I'll probably just finish off by just saying, probably my experience, the more complex your platform is, the more need there probably is for that additional layer for some of your accounts for that technical account manager to sit alongside a CSM. But for some of your accounts, it doesn't mean that that's a legitimate model. It just means that some of your accounts are just a little bit more needy than perhaps others, and therefore you need someone with a slightly different set of skills than the extreme on the spectrum of a professional services, someone who's far too technical, and a CSM who isn't technical enough.
100%.
I think that flows nicely into our next question, which is from Kim. So Kim says, how do you suggest buffering in time for your project manager or CSM, depending on who's doing the onboarding, to the opportunity? Kim says that they're currently facing a stage where opportunities are coming in much faster than they can onboard them, and they need ways, and this precedes the actual client onboarding. So I think the question there is, how can you kind of build in time between onboarding projects to make sure that you have enough time to everything that's coming your way?
Anybody want to start? It's a good question, a good problem to have for sure. Okay, since I start talking, I'll start. We do have dedicated, so my leader of my team really does handle a lot of the prospects, the opportunity calls. Standard pitch decks are super important on this, standard scoping protocols, standard SOW templates, repeatable processes are super important to make sure you're not reinventing the wheel with every single opportunity. So definitely standardize as much as you can to simplify your lives. But it's also a great growth opportunity for folks on your team to also start to step in and support some of those sales opportunities. Perhaps you bring in somebody to do the technical scoping and so forth. At IBM, we actually had a role called a principal, and they were both technical and they were sales savvy. So they could get in there, do the pitch, do the scope, and write up the statement of work. So it's, from my experience, it's good to have folks that are actually really focused on that to be a good partner to sales. But then also don't be afraid and shy to bring up your other folks and give those experiences, because it's super important to grow them as well.
I agree with all that. I think the sales enablement side of it is crucial. And then clarity and regular, presentations to sales meetings from the head of the team or from individual project managers, and just focus in that what the PM should be doing typically during a sales process is coming in near the end. I talk about the white glove service. I talk about how they're going to de-risk. I talk about the value that we will bring as a service delivery team, if you like, and we'll take all the risk away for you. We will give you that comfort blanket. And I think if you just focus in on that, and even in some cases, what I've worked in the past, where it's a bit dangerous, you can give the salespeople almost like a spreadsheet where you punch in certain things and it gives you an indicative time span or an indicative number of days and so on. So it's just understanding what are the common things that the sales guys need in order to help close the deal. Because that's all sales want. Come in, help me close the deal. I'm not interested really in what you have to say. Just help me close the deal.
And Peter, you talked earlier about the need for having a proper resource management capability, introducing time cards, effort management, you called it. And that when the question there, which was, how do you manage this? How do you manage to kind of keep time for this? You build it into your plan from the beginning, and kind of, I can look at it and say, right, I could have each PM has 5% of their overall time that they can spend on the pre-sale, on the opportunity to support that over. 5% being a number I pluck out the air, and you build that into the model. And when someone said, well, you don't have enough people to handle the workload coming in, I can look at the list of things that you are asking of the team and say, right, what do we take out? Right, I can't take out holiday or sickness. That's gonna, that's got to be in there. So are you suggesting that we take out team meetings, one-to-ones, training, the time that we spend with customers pre-sale? And of course, when you have that conversation, nobody wants to take any of that stuff out. So great, we need to keep all that stuff. There's our model. So this is how many people we need. And that's where the capacity goes. And that hopefully backs up that message of, I need an extra PM because yes, we're spending time pre-sale, but then you need the time cards to be able to back that up. When someone turns around and says, well, the sales team are obviously saying that they're not getting enough of your time. It takes too long to get one of your project managers involved. well, I can look at it and say, well, actually, we're spending 7% of our overall time in that particular part of the cycle. So again, maybe we need to increase the size of the team.
Right. Yeah. Couldn't agree more.
I think we're getting a lot of questions, you know, which is great. So I think we have time for a few more. Just following on from your points there, Phil, Wayne has asked, when you have a large team delivering services, how do you ensure that the entire team is utilised in the right way and you don't see pinch points on set resources? For example, your project managers are overrun.
I think, yeah, Wayne specifically says on a large team, because it's almost like a reverse bell curve. When you are small, you kind of have the ability to say, great, I've got only 3 project managers. They have to know everything about every part of the product and be completely utilized over all of it. You then have this problem when you kind of get to that medium to large size, which is that not everybody is going to be trained in everything, but you're also maybe not large enough to get the economy of scale that you would have in an enterprise and Accenture type delivery where, do you know what, I can have bench time, we can afford it. We can have a whole load of people with a certain skill set sat around for a week or so because the work's not there. In that middle size, you absolutely have to be able to use everybody as efficiently as possible. And it comes back down to having the right tools to do it. You can build a very overly complicated spreadsheet that works out exactly what regions and what skills and what stuff you're predicting. But then as soon as the sales don't come in as planned, I think it even says it in the question, you know, if you're forecasting we're going to sell product A, product B, product C, but we sell more of one and less of the other, you need the capability and a tool to be able to call out, great, this is where I need extra skills, this is where I'm going to have a gap. And then if you are running a large team like that, you know, the type of, you know, customer success or professional service enablement, you know, project enablement, where you can quickly skill people up as needs be. As a large company, those are the sorts of things I would be thinking of including in that the budget for the year to make sure I've got to manage that function.
My only quick thing I would add to that is when you're looking at your teams, if you've got multiple different products or different industries you're supporting, for example, you could have a major and a minor for your folks. You know, make sure you've got folks that, you know, maybe have their expertise competency, but maybe they've got a minor or 2 as well, and you can plug and play folks. Think of it as career development for your team as well. You don't want them to get pigeonholed because they could potentially get bored. So it's good to give them opportunities to expand their skill set.
I think we have time for one more question. And I think James's question is a great one for us to end on. So James says that several of the speakers have spoken about factoring in the customer's capacity in addition to your professional services teams. How do you usually go about formalizing that step, but also accounting for that within scalable or repeatable onboarding processes? And I'll throw that out to whoever would like to go first.
I think if I understand the question, it's a clear and unambiguous framework for how you deliver and how you onboard your platform, with clear demarcation as to the roles and the responsibilities that the customer has. And I think the real gem in this is the impact if you don't supply the resources to us, Mr. Mrs. Customer, right? I think that's really, really critical. If you know, to show them the risk, the actual timeline, right? I think that's something that I don't think people do enough of, because it's not because we're afraid to upset the customer, but I think to be absolutely clear and to have your project plan and show the project is now at risk because of you, because of your resources. It's now at risk, and escalating upwards when a customer's resource is not playing ball, right? I think so that's important. Do it as if it was your own resource, because your customer contact, the person who's signing off on that project, will probably thank you for it.
I think it maybe an example which is probably valid for a lot, if not most, of SaaS companies is going to be training. That at some point the customer is going to want to be trained to use the product. And when I first started in SaaS, we trained everybody. So we scoped for that and said, okay, how many classrooms of people do you want to be trained out? So, okay, you're delivering, it's 700 users that are going to use it. You can fit 20 people in a classroom, blah, 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 divide it out. Okay, so you're going to need one of our consultants for this much time. And that doesn't scale very well as you're starting to sell to 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 user kind of accounts. And so we're going to shift that. That's going to become the customer's responsibility. We will train your trainers. We will train the people that are going to go out and do it. We're going to, rather than a half an hour classroom session for X classes, we'll give 2 hours to the trainers. They're going to become experts in everything so they can handle all the different questions that you've got. But I'm now going to be spending 2 to 3 hours with a trainer rather than 15 to 30 hours doing repeated training classroom sessions. That goes into a statement of work. It becomes very clear from the beginning, this is a customer responsibility. This is what we're committing to doing. And as long as everybody's very clear about it from the beginning and there are no surprises along the way, that's generally worked really well.
I agree with everything these guys said. It's all about expectation management. Back to what I said earlier too. In the sales cycle, I love it in the statement of work. And when the project kicks off, my only other suggestion would be have a one-to-one with your executive sponsor. Talk to them about the potential risks where projects go south and say, I'm going to keep you posted if any of these risks pop up. So if and when that does happen and that customer's resource isn't available, you can bring them quickly to the table and say, remember that conversation? This is what's happening and I need your help to solve it. So expectation management, never let it be a surprise to them. That's my only advice.
No, thank you so much. And I think we will draw our Q&A session to an end there. I know there are some questions that we haven't got round to, so we will make sure these are answered and the answers sent in a follow-up email. But I would like to thank our speakers so much for joining us today. Thank you to all of our audience for asking those great questions and for everybody in the background that helps us to set up these great roundtables. As I've said repeatedly through this webinar, you would have seen some stats from our recent survey on capacity. Everybody on this call will receive early access to our new white paper. It covers all things capacity, surprise, surprise, where we surveyed hundreds of leaders in the SaaS world regarding their opinions on capacity, how to measure it, what it means to them, and how to avoid capacity pitfalls. You should see this in your inboxes in November, but we will also be sharing this session in a follow-up email, and you'll be able to sign up for early access to make sure it goes straight into your inbox as well. But in the meantime, you can always check out all of our other great content on precursive.com. But again, thank you all so much for joining, and thanks to our speakers. And we will hopefully see you all again soon. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.